WorldNet Daily is live. Welcome, everybody, to the program. The conspiracies are true. They keep coming true every day, don't they, folks? It just seems that way. Welcome to the program. We are very pleased to have with us today a very special guest, Joel Skousen. He is author and publisher of World Affairs Brief, and we have his website here that we can pull up. And before we bring him on here, Joel has accurately predicted and detailed the complication and chaos of our modern world. He is one of the sharpest minds when it comes to political and global affairs. And so on behalf of Josh here, Mr. Skousen, welcome to the program, sir. Good to see you.
Well, it's good to be with you. It's the first time I've been with WorldNet Daily. I've read the website for many years and respect it, so it's good to be with you.
Fantastic. Well, that's good to hear. Hopefully, this will be the start of more to come. But let's get the viewers kind of prepped here on what we're going to talk about, because when it comes to, I mean, even just the news that's coming out today with another assassination attempt on Trump, we've got clips here from RFK talking about how the Trump's transition was and his effects with the deep state back in 2016. You've been following all of this. You've been covering all of this. And so I really kind of want to throw it to you and let us pepper you with questions as we go along here. But can we start off with this clip from RFK and sort of watch what he says here and let you jump off from that?
Sure.
Let's do that. Let's watch this. This was on Tucker.
Here's what, and for a lot of other things, that I disagreed with in the first Trump administration. I didn't like seeing Scott Gottlieb cash in at FDA and Alex Azar running HHS. And, oil lobbyists running the Interior Department, coal lobbyists running EPA, telecommunication lobbyists running the FCC, et cetera. I talked to President Trump at length about this, and he said, look, when I got elected in 2016, I didn't know how to govern. And to tell you the truth, it was kind of surprising that we won the election. And he said, I was immediately inundated by lobbyists and business people, and they were all saying, you appoint this guy, appoint that guy, appoint that guy. And he said, I did it, and I wish I hadn't. And he understands that Scott Gottlieb was cashing in, and he did a $100 billion favor for Pfizer, and then went back to work for Pfizer on his board of directors. And so I think that President Trump has said to me that we're going to do something different this time. And
yeah, fascinating insights there. So I don't know, a lot of people have probably speculated that, right, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, so this is why we have Joel on the show today, and we're excited to hear from him because, as we kind of mentioned in the open, Joel is known for being someone that takes, the swirling conspiracies, but identifies where the facts are. And we're excited to have Joel comment on this clip from RFK.
Well, thank you. Donald Trump was never a conservative before he ran for president, but he was a good populist. He had a good feeling for what would appeal to conservatives if he was going to run for president. He'd hobnob with the Clintons and other people and had to deal with the mafia in his casinos, as everybody does in the gambling world. But Donald Trump lives by briefings. He doesn't ever do any homework. That's why he had a problem with this debate, is that even though he had a week of briefings by people, he doesn't take notes. He will not memorize any arguments or any facts. And that's why he just wings it at the things. And that's a weakness, because you can't get Donald Trump to do any homework. But you can't be president and not know the history of the deep state and the conspiratorial history of the illegal acts of government. Now, I deal in both facts and theory in conspiracy. And theory because the illegal acts of government are still completely covered up under the guise of national security. That's why they hid away the JFK assassination files for 50 years, to make sure the public they thought maybe they would forget about it by the time the 50 years were up. But when it was up in the Obama administration, he didn't release it. Trump said he was going to release it, and JFK said in one of his clips that he talked to JFK about that once he endorsed the president. And he said, "Why didn't you release the JFK files?" And he said, "Mike Pompeo came to visit me and told me that it would be a catastrophe, it would destroy America if we ever revealed the JFK facts." He, in fact, said this to Judge Napolitano on Fox News. And Judge Napolitano says, "What did he tell you to change your mind?" And Trump said, "I can't tell you." And but I'll tell you, JFK or RFK didn't know why Mike Pompeo was going to say this, because he said, he was protecting the agencies, he was protecting the deep state, so to speak. Well, that's because Mike Pompeo is deep state. Let me tell your audience that there has to be a deep state control over every single federal agency that has a deep state component. The CIA has a dark side and a white side. The FBI has a dark side, which we see weaponized against Donald Trump, and a light side. And the dark side of the FBI, for example, does a lot of agent provocateurs, like they infested the Capitol protest with Trump with over 200 agents inside, masquerading as Trump supporters that were inflaming the people, getting them to go into the Capitol and other things, and also antagonizing the crowd by getting the police to use rubber bullets and tear gas against them to make them angry.
Joel, is that like Ray Epps? Are you?
Yeah. Now,
would you think he'd be a part of that?
He would sue me if I said definitively, as he's trying to sue other people. But Ray Epps appears to be, someone who is provoking the crowd. But there were many, many others in there. But the DEA, for example, has a dark side. They import drugs and then they fight against drugs. And the DHS, of course, under Mayorkas, is a deep state operation. They have some white guys. The Customs and Border Enforcement mostly are good guys that are trying to do their job, but there are also some corrupt people in there that won't blow the whistle on what's going on in there. So, for example, Donald Trump, when he was president, said that he never created another foreign war. Well, that may be true, but he did, because of his ignorance about foreign policy conspiracies, he allowed the deep state to talk him into attacking Syria 3 times. He also allowed the NSA to tell him that General Soleimani of Iran was the greatest sponsor of terror in the world. In fact, he was not. He was the greatest sponsor of the Iraqi militia in arms and funding that were fighting against U.S.-backed terror. It's the deep state that created ISIS. And the deep state, our military, never fought against ISIS. It was actually only the Iraqi militia. In fact, the Iraq's parliament showed a video of U.S. helicopters coming in at the end of the Battle of Mosul and rescuing ISIS leaders so they could fight another day. In the last Battle of Raqqa, where ISIS was supposedly defeated, the U.S. hired 50 semi-trucks driven by Arab drivers to go in and rescue ISIS, their families, and their heavy weapons, and take them back to Syria where they belong. Now, a little background on this. Remember the invasion of Libya against Muammar Gaddafi. That's what started it gave us the pool of jihadists to invade Syria. And that was the purpose of invading Libya and taking down Gaddafi, which was the closest thing you'd have to a benevolent dictator. I mean, it's true that he had some corruption, but he used most of his wealth to give free hospitals, free education, and other things to the people. And they liked Gaddafi, except for the Muslim Brotherhood and the jihadists in there. So when we took down Muammar Gaddafi, the jihadists in Egypt took over, and it's been chaos ever since, as well as in Tunisia. Now, when the war in Iraq happened, remember that Colin Powell talked about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which we never found. Well, in fact, Iraq did have one type of weapons of mass destruction. That was chemical weapons. But the U.S. knew that the Russians took all of those chemical weapons out of Iraq before the war on trucks and trucked them to Syria. So they knew Syria had them. And so the U.S. was going to use that as an excuse to attack Syria. And by the way, Syria was now in the hands of Bashar al-Assad, which was the son of Hafez al-Assad. Now, Hafez al-Assad was a bad guy. He's the one who did contract terror for the CIA in Syria. But Bashar al-Assad was ophthalmologist, trained in the UK, spoke fluent English, married to an English woman, a very mild-mannered person. Now, he inherited a deep state in Syria, but he was not that himself and wanted to clean up. But the U.S. decided to attack Syria over the issue of chemical weapons. But they got shocked when they threatened him with attack unless he released them. And he said, no, take them. I don't want them. And suddenly the excuse for invading Syria was dead. And so the U.S. then invaded Libya, imported all these jihadists to create a, quote, civil war. It wasn't, it was an imported war. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't opposition in the Syrian government. But then they took, halfway through that war, they took half of the jihadists and renamed them ISIS and gave them priority of funding, black weapons funding, and made huge weapons depots in Iraq. Did you ever wonder where ISIS came out of nowhere? And suddenly it was the most well-funded, biggest terrorist organization in the world. Iraq was calling the Obama administration and saying, look at these weapons depots out there. What are they doing there? You got to investigate. And the U.S. did nothing because this was for ISIS. And what did they do with ISIS? They sent them on a rampage into Iraq. Now, what are Muslims doing attacking other Muslims? The deep state agenda in doing that, one of the most important one was, of course, to create millions of Muslim refugees. And where did they send them? They sent them to Europe.
Joel, I want to jump in real quick and go back. Just this is all fantastic, but I wanted to go back to what you were saying about Mike Pompeo. Two questions. The first would be what you believe will be revealed that they're so afraid of in the Kennedy files, and then the second, there's still a giant number of conservatives that think Mike Pompeo's a good guy. So could you kind of tell us what you believe they're hiding and what's the deal with Mike Pompeo?
Well, Mike Pompeo is deep state. You know that he's deep state because nobody gets to be head of the CIA unless you're deep state, as well as Secretary of State that he did. That's all you need to know. Everyone, there's, whether it's John Brennan or everyone else. Now, John Brennan had a very dark background. Mike Pompeo doesn't particularly, but by the positions they put him in. I mean, look at Dick Cheney, who was the vice president and the handler of George W. Bush, worked for Halliburton, has no oil experience whatsoever. This is the revolving door, you see, that goes on when you're deep state and you're out of office. You put you into a big plush job with a major deep state corporation like Halliburton, and then you bring you out to be vice president. He was the one that was handling the 9/11 attack on the United States from the basement of the White House. He was the one conversing with that Air Force officer who was panicking about Flight 77 coming in toward the Pentagon. And there was a standing order not to shoot it down. Did the order still stand, Mr. Vice President? And get up to 15 miles. Have you heard anything different? Of course they still stand. Well, they didn't tell about that conversation they published that in the 9/11 Commission. But this is how you track, those people. I mean, I knew that James Comey and Robert Mueller were deep state, and Christopher Wray, who Trump ignorantly replaced Comey with, because they were all three involved in the cover-up of 9/11. Even Brett Kavanaugh was deep state because he was number 2 to Ken Starr in the cover-up of the Vince Foster murder, the attorney and accountant of the Clintons who was killed because he was getting cold feet and going to testify before Congress. So that's how you tell.
Do you think that are the Kennedy files, do they just reveal that? Is it as simple as, it reveals that the CIA has been working against citizens' interests from the beginning? Or
no, look, the CIA files are going to contain two major problems. They're going to contain information relative to conversations with the mafia. That's where they hired the hitmen to man the grassy knoll snipers that attacked John F. Kennedy. They're also going to reveal that, as Robert F. Kennedy said in his Tucker Carlson interview that you just aired, That's where they're going to reveal that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA plant, and it was a ruse sending him to Russia to establish those in the anti-Castro committee. It said all that was a CIA operation. That's going to be in the files as well. I don't know how much other incriminating evidence, but those are enough to make sure that the CIA is condemned over what happened in
Joel.
There might
Joel,
be yes. Go ahead.
That begs the question. I hate to jump to modern day real quick, but like this Ryan Ruth guy who's back and forth to Ukraine, he's in Hawaii, he's from North Carolina. He tried to take out President Trump just a few days ago. Will you bring up Lee Harvey Oswald being sent to Russia as kind of a ruse? I mean, more is being revealed about this attempted assassin, if that's what we should call him. It strikes me. It's very eerie. It's very eerie.
Yeah, let me comment on that right now, because there is some information you may not have heard about. That Ryan Rouge was, he's a retired roofer, hasn't worked for several years, actually makes only about $3,000 a month, including Social Security. And yet he flew first class back from Hawaii to get back to the United States. And you wonder how you do that. He worked in Ukraine, and nobody goes over there and works in Ukraine as a recruiter for other people to come in unless they're working for the CIA or other, black operations. We're not supposed to have obvious people in there. So the U.S. does everything through the CIA in Ukraine. And that's where they recruit people. And that's what happened with the Oklahoma City bomber. He got recruited in the Army and thought he was CIA. He never recanted, even to conservatives that talked to him in prison. But
so is it your theory, I guess, at this point? Is it a theory to say that maybe this Ruth guy was recruited and this wasn't just him going off on himself?
Yeah, absolutely.
You think there's enough evidence?
Bill O'Reilly thinks the government would never use someone unstable as Ryan Rouge, but that's exactly who they choose. They choose unstable people that they can go and put on mood-altering drugs or get into hypnosis with a psychiatrist, etc., and do things. But remember, there's a couple other tip-offs here. Trump was not scheduled to go to the golf course there. This was a last-minute schedule change. So how did he know to show up at the golf course? Now, he was there 12 hours earlier, scoping out the place, because that was found out by the FBI. They immediately did cell phone tracking information to see where his cell phone was. And of course, they have, through surveillance, they know whose everybody's cell phone number is. It's easy to track. But
they could blow pagers up now too, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, they could do a lot.
Well, that's Israel intervening there. And they've also blown up not cell phones, but handheld radios that Hezbollah has purchased. They intervened in those shipments going to Hezbollah out of Hungary and wired them with explosives. Got a lot of civilians too, but they don't care who they kill.
Joel, doesn't it seem? Well, I'll posit this idea. It seems like this Ryan Routh guy cannot live very long. Or do you think there's just plausible deniability to hide all of his connections?
Oh, yeah. The connections won't come out any more than they will come out with Mr. Crooks, who shot at Donald Trump. Now, there was cell phone tracking also, which the Heritage Foundation, the FBI didn't do this, by the way. They did it on Ryan Routh, but they didn't do it with Mr. Crooks because it led to their field office in Washington, D.C. Cell phone tracking from 2 throwaway phones at the Crooks' home that showed up at the field office in Washington, D.C. And that shows that there was agent provocateurs handling Crooks. There was also a van with the explosives in it there. He rode a bicycle there, but this van with that's tied to an Arizona company that has CIA contacts. And so we don't know what the explosives were going to do. And he had a handheld detonator in him, but he had no knowledge of how to use a handheld or wire up explosives or do many things. So Crooks, I don't believe this was a Secret Service problem, except for the fact that the local police in Butler County offered the Secret Service radios for their encrypted tactical frequency, and the CIA neglected to pick them up. Even after they were called and reminded to come pick up your radios so that we can have contact, during the protest. They did not show up to pick him up. And so that's when you had the confrontation on the roof between the police officer looking up and seeing Crooks, him dropping down when the rifle was painted him. They immediately got on the radio and said, shoot her on the roof, shoot her on the roof. But that was the tactical frequency, which the CIA was not listening, or the Secret Service was not listening to. And by the way, it's important to understand that Crooks had taken up a position on the roof where a tree in front of him between there and the rally blocked both sniper teams' view of him. And that's why they could see all the commotion going on the ground, but they couldn't see him on the roof to take action until Crooks made the first 3 shots and got Trump's ear. Trump ducks down behind a big speaker box. And in order then to see Trump, to get off those wild 5 shots that he fired afterwards, he had to roll to the right-hand side in order to get a view. And that's when he put himself into view of one of the sniper teams who killed him. But Butler County also got off a shot even before then, which hit his rifle and disabled it after the 5 shots. Those are information you probably haven't heard.
Joel, so
go ahead,
good,
Josh.
man. So excellent. I'm sorry, Matt. Joel, I just have to ask, you have so many interesting facts on these things, but all of this it really reveals some kind of country that doesn't feel like our own. And we're headed toward a pivotal moment of our election. I would just love to know what you expect coming in November.
Well, they clearly stole the election from Donald Trump in 2020. And I was one of the only journalists in my World Affairs Brief that published in November 20th issue of 2020 the stolen data from the Edison research, which Edison research is the one that gets all of the state election data and feeds it to the television networks. Everything you see on television comes from Edison Research, which is owned by a Spanish company. And someone hacked into their account and did a spreadsheet on every vote that came in for Donald Trump and Joe Biden and showed where they were allocated and how many hundreds of thousands of votes that came in for Trump that were not allocated to Trump or that were flipped to Biden. And it was right there in black and white. Now, none of that information got to Trump's attorneys because he had hired Rudy Giuliani to head his legal team. And Rudy Giuliani was deep state, clearly involved in the 9/11 cover-up. And so that's why the courts were able to dismiss all of those charges, saying, well, you've shown that there were irregularities, but you haven't shown how it quantitatively would have affected the election. But in answer to your question, they're not going to let Trump win this election, I can tell you, especially because he's now in alliance with Robert F. Kennedy. He's on his transition team. And Robert F. Kennedy knows about half of the conspiratorial issues, and he knows all of the big pharma government conspiracy and vaccine conspiracy and censorship things. He's got all the facts. He will make sure that Trump does not appoint predictable puppets in those big pharma type positions within government. And I'll tell you, there's a major agenda of the deep state in order to poison people with vaccines and to do illegal acts. They're not going to let Trump get elected with Robert F. Kennedy. Now, they probably weren't going to do it anyway, but it assures it, in my opinion, if Robert F. Kennedy is part of that team. Sadly, Robert F. Kennedy is clueless on the foreign policy conspiracies, which we can talk about. Those are extremely important since most conservatives have bought into the same disinformation he has.
Well, can I guess? Does this have anything to do with Ukraine being sort
Absolutely.
of yeah, that's right. I'm a little clued in. You're kind of blowing my mind on some of this stuff, Joel, but I'm a little clued in. Yeah. So talk to us about Ukraine. Cause you hear everything from like, this is where we've had our bioweapons lab. It's been a money laundering outfit. I mean, is when you think of, when you just said about Kennedy, is there, he's a Democrat family, longtime Democrats. I mean, this is kind of like it's all deep state, but yeah, please continue.
Well, it has to do you before you can understand Ukraine, you have to understand that the Soviets faked their own demise in 1989 through 1991. The Soviet Union did not fall because of spontaneous desire to be free. There has never in history ever been a tyrannical government like the Soviet Union or any tyrannical government that has ever voluntarily stepped down. Never. They've always had to be overthrown or die of their own corruption. But this was falsified. In fact, I want to tell you, Josh, if your organization has any influence with Tucker Carlson, if he wants to find the other half of the conspiracy theories that Robert F. Kennedy didn't tell about, he needs to talk to me. I'll blow his socks off about the phony fall of the Soviet Union. And here's the evidence. Vladimir Putin even told Tucker to his face, which nobody picked up but me, of course, because I'm the only journalist that has broadcast about the phony fall of the Soviet Union in the United States of America until recently. But he said the Russian leadership effectively initiated the fall of the Soviet Union, went right over Tucker Carlson's head. Why? Because he didn't remember the official narrative was this was spontaneous from underneath that the Soviets couldn't control, but it wasn't true. Erich Honecker on his deathbed in Chile, where he was in exile, said, Moscow gave me orders to let the student protest in Leipzig, Germany, go forward and to stand down the Stasi. The KGB were also stood down in Moscow Square and did not arrest the protesters listening to Yeltsin on the tank, broadcasting about liberty and democracy in Russia. And the television station that Yeltsin was using was still run by the Communist Party, and they didn't pull the plug. They gave orders for all of the leaders of the communist Eastern European states to stand down, and only Ceausescu refused, and they had him killed. So you see, this was a fake. In fact, Lech Walesa of Solidarity in Poland was a Russian agent. And so was Václav Havel, the great Western reformer of Czechoslovakia. But it's interesting, in that interview with Tucker Carlson, Putin also told him something that was essential to the war on Ukraine. He said, Tucker, Lenin and Stalin put the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass into the borders of Ukraine and put Crimea into Ukraine, and I don't know why, he claimed. Of course he knew why. Just as Lenin had faked the fall of the Soviet Union before in the late 1920s to get aid and trade from it, he knew that they were going to fake it again, or that they did fake it. And that's why they put them into the borders of Ukraine. Putin regaled Carlson about how close Ukraine and Russia are, that they need to be one country, but it isn't true. He failed to remember, and Tucker failed to remember, that Stalin starved millions of Ukrainians in 1932, and they've hated Russia ever since in Western Ukraine. But now to the phony story of the Western coup being the overthrow of a legitimately elected president, which RFK believes and all conservatives believe. That president was Viktor Yanukovych, a communist. And remember, when the Russians faked their own demise in the Soviet Union, they didn't remove any of the communists from government in any of these countries. And if Lech Walesa was a Soviet agent, think how many Soviet pro agents they have in the governments when they became part of NATO. And that's why there's so much corruption in Ukraine, is all the communists were still there. The people still complain about having to pay bribes to the bureaucrats, just like during the Soviet years. That's why there's Burisma and other, that's why any money that the U.S. sends to Ukraine goes down a rat hole. And so, but they did, under Victoria Nuland, give part of that $5 billion to fund the protests in the Maidan Square in 2014. It wasn't $5 billion for Ukraine. That's a mistake. That was for all of Eastern Europe, Democracy Now! Funding. But even though the West funded the protests, they were surrounded for 6 months by the Berkut, which is the Ukrainian riot police, ruthless people. They tortured, they killed some of the protesters. They're a bad group of SWAT type people. But in 2014, in February, Viktor Yanukovych, the communist president, decided to make a deal with the protesters. And he met with 3 of who he called the protest leaders, and he made a deal about stepping down if there was an interim government and new elections, and giving some protesters' demand. But the protesters refused to accept that deal. That was on a Thursday. On Friday, the protesters woke up in the Maidan Square, and the Berkut, the riot police, were nowhere to be seen. They walked out of the Maidan Square free to circulate them, walked up to the presidential palace, and there were no guards on the palace. They were free to walk through. The same thing with the parliamentary building. Now, I asked the question, who could have given orders to the Berkut to stand down? It's just like the phony fall of the Soviet Union. Only the communist leader, in fact, it was his puppet head of the parliament, the Rada, who was a communist, who gave the orders to the Berkut to stand down. And then on Saturday, the next day, the communist-dominated parliament, the Rada, ousted Yanukovych from the president, and he fled for his life. Now, that's like the Capitol 6 protesters going up to the Capitol, and there's no police there, and the Democratic majority in Congress ousting Joe Biden as president. Now, how believable would that be? You see, this was not a Western coup. This was a communist falsified coup to blame it on the West. And let me tell you what the purpose was. This is essential. He did have an interim president for 2 months there, Yushchenko, which in that phone call, Victoria Nuland talked about, we want Yushchenko in the president. And he was there as an interim. But then they elected a phony nationalist who campaigned on the fact that we were going to have peace with the Russians in the Donbass. They could be self-governing. They can speak Russian. They don't have to speak Ukrainian. And then as soon as he became president, this is Petro Poroshenko, he turned on the Russians and antagonized them. He said, you can't be semi-independent. You have to speak Ukrainian. And that provided Putin the excuse to invade. Now, let me point out, had Viktor Yanukovych still been in office, a pro-Russian, pro-Putin president, the people and the Russians couldn't have said, what's he doing persecuting us? He's one of us. It took a phony nationalist. And remember, all of the prime ministers up until that time who had claimed to be Ukrainian nationalists were actually in the pocket of Russia. That's what happens when you fake your own demise and you have false leaders running the country. So that's the real story of Ukraine.
Yeah, and Joel, I want to you mentioned something, and I know you were using it as an example that no one would believe a scenario where the Democrats would oust Joe Biden through a sort of insurrection type thing, but it looks like they would just kick him off the campaign and replace him with a Marxist like Kamala anyway. So when we when we see that kind of landscape, what do you think this whole Kamala Harris in for Joe Biden thing is? Is it really just what they're telling us, or do you think that there's something else here?
There is something else, but let me just finish my thought on the Ukraine so that you understand this. The problem, and this is what Robert F. Kennedy said in this clip by Tucker Carlson, which if you give a link to that, if you look at the Midwest meeting from Tucker Carlson on his national tour, starting at minute 50 with the interview with Robert F. Kennedy, he says, you cannot trust anything the media tells you. They're always lying. The government is always lying to you. And I'm here to tell you that that's not exactly true. They are now telling the truth about Russia. Now, I know it galls conservatives, and I'm no neocon. I am the biggest enemy against the deep state and neoconservatism that's ever been. But the conservatives, especially under the leadership of Ron Paul and Paul Craig Roberts and Alex Jones and others, have bought into a major falsehood because the phony war on terror and ginning up terror for reasons of getting millions of Muslims into Europe and controlling oil and other things like that. They came to the erroneous conclusion that everybody the deep state is against, like Iraq and Afghanistan, must be innocent. Yes, Iraq and Afghanistan were innocent. Syria was innocent. But Russia is not innocent. And you've got to remember, there's a 10-point series on my website, joelskousen.com, on my campaign website for president, about on a radio show that I gave a 10-part series on the history of the deep state. And people can watch that, but it shows the history of the deep state starting from the beginning in 1917. It was the Western globalists who built up the Bolsheviks. It gave them the money to win, cut off military aid to the White Russians so the Bolsheviks could win. and that financed Hitler. There's a book by Anthony Sutton on the Wall Street and the Rise of Bolshevism, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler. But before the war that they create, whether it's World War I or World War II or the coming World War III, they have to switch sides and start to attack the very enemies they built up. And that's the stage that we're in. The globalists have been building up Russia and China. They brought China to power by cutting off military aid to Chiang Kai-shek. They gave Russia the rest of the nuclear plans that they couldn't steal in the Manhattan Project. They gave them the first shipment of uranium. Under the Nixon administration, when Henry Kissinger was his handler, they gave miniature ball-bearing technology to Russia so they could MIRV their missiles, meaning have multiple independent warheads. They couldn't do that before the Nixon administration. So you see, we built these enemies. We allowed China to steal technology. Henry Kissinger at the Paris peace talks brought China into the United Nations and gave them a seat on the Security Council. What did that have to do with the settlement in Vietnam? These were our enemies in Vietnam. And then, of course, but what I'm saying is that prior to every one of these wars that they're building enemies to create, because they need wars to talk us into a global government that has power. World War II gave us the UN. They need a third world war to get us into a militarized global government.
Joel, I'd love to ask, you did kind of mention World War III, and that's a big loaded question I want to ask you is, are we close to that with the seemingly the long-range missiles being threatened to be used? This is like a red line for Putin. Are we close to a third world war? And what is the goal of the globalist deep state for that?
Well, we are only generally close. We are not. It won't be because of Ukraine. Putin has threatened almost a dozen times now to use nuclear weapons for various red lines. We passed them all and he hasn't done it. Why can't he do it? Because the globalists have been smart about this. They've been using Ukraine to weaken the Russian conventional military. And because of that, Putin cannot nuke the West, because if you can't occupy, which you can't occupy all of Ukraine, let alone all of Eastern Europe, let alone the United States, if you can't occupy, the West simply rebuilds and comes back after you, okay? He has to wait for China, and that's what the globalists want, because only the combination of the nuclear weapons of Russia and China and the conventional power of China do they have the ability to nuke U.S. and NATO military targets. They're not going to go after cities on the first preemptive strike, only military targets, because they depend on the infrastructure in the West to provide the jobs and the they want to take over and form their own form of the New World Order by occupying the West, not destroying it. So they're only going to hit military targets.
Joel, I'm sorry. Are you saying that they're going to, and I know this is, you've mentioned this before to me, but can you please describe that you are suggesting that this is leading to a nuclear strike from our enemies on America? Could you kind of, you did mention that, but I would love to go back and you kind of explain that. It's a big headline.
Well, this is normally a 2-hour lecture that I give, but I'll try to give us a summary version of it. The West signed in 1997 under the Clinton administration Presidential Decision Directive 60, which instructs our missile forces to absorb a nuclear first strike and then retaliate afterwards, which is nearly impossible because all you got left is your submarines, and half of them are imported at any one time, thanks to Clinton's commitment to the Russians. And their warheads are not capable of penetrating hardened targets. So clearly, the only reason the globalists would do that was because they want our military decapitated. They know that Russia and China intend to do a nuclear decapitating strike on the military. But that's the excuse they're going to use to come out of their bunkers and tell the American people, hey, look, our military has been decapitated or 90% destroyed. We've got to join together in a militarized global government to prosecute this war. And like 9/11, everyone will lay down and say, do whatever it takes to save us. That's the purpose of PDD 60, is to make sure that we absorb that nuclear first strike so that we cannot effectively retaliate. Now, I don't have time to go in how the globalists intend to win that war, but they do have a plan, and a lot of that has to do with interceptors in space. But that's the intent of the globalists. The entire agenda of globalism is to get rid of national sovereignty and get everybody, at least in the West, into a global government. And conservatives need to understand there are three predator centers. There are Russia, China, and the Western globalists. Each of them intend to do their own form of a new world order. I can tell you that the tyrannical version of Russia and China's version will be much worse than the globalists, because at least they have to pretend to respect democratic values. Now, they intend, of course, to regulate you to death, as they did in the EU. But in any case, that's the general scenario. And now the trigger event, I might say, the trigger event's not going to be Ukraine, because Putin cannot use nukes. He cannot use nukes. And that's why long-range missiles are effective about getting Putin to stop, because he's bleeding economically because of this war, and bleeding a lot of people. And so that is the strategy of the West, to use longer range weapons and Ukrainian indigenous drones, which have been very effective getting clear to Moscow, to hit their manufacturing plants and their other things, to make it too costly. Remember, Russia still intends to go to nuclear war with the West, so they can't allow their entire conventional army to be destroyed. It has been tremendously weakened. We know their weak points now. But the trigger event will not be the Middle East. There's no way to bring China into that. The trigger event will be the attack on Taiwan, which could come at any time, but I don't think it'll come until China's ready to take on the West completely in a full world war, because North Korea has threatened to intervene if we try to stop China from attacking Taiwan. And if North Korea intervenes by attacking South Korea and our troops there, we have to intervene, because we have 26,000 troops, and the Americans would demand that we stop North Korea. And he's got an alliance with China. So if we have a full war with North Korea over Taiwan, that's the excuse that China has to level the playing field, to nuke our military forces in order to win.
Yeah, Joel, and yeah, China is a whole other topic that we could spend another hour on. But back to Russia real quickly. When you say that maybe the vulnerability here for Putin is financial, it's money. It sounded like that's what you were saying. We have this clip here from Putin saying that he actually would support, Kamala Harris, because that's who Biden supports, and that the reason why he wouldn't want to support Trump is because they impose sanctions and that sort of thing. So let's watch this real quick and get your quick reaction before we wrap out today. So let's watch this clip.
Фаворитом, если можно так сказать, был действующий президент господин Байден. Вот его сняли с гонки, но он рекомендовал всем своим, сторонникам поддержать госпожу Харрис. Вот и мы тоже так сделаем, будем ее поддерживать. Это, во-первых. А во-вторых...
Раз завещали, значит, надо, да?
Вот. А во-вторых, она так выразительно и заразительно смеется, что это говорит о том, что у нее все хорошо. Трамп, он же ввел столько количества всяких ограничений и санкций в отношении России, сколько до него ни один президент раньше не вводил. А если у госпожи Харрис все хорошо, то, может быть, она воздержится от таких действий подобного рода.
Или отменит их.
В конечном итоге выбор за американским народом, и мы с уважением будем относиться к этому выбору.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Joel, I mean, sometimes it feels like we have to take Putin with a little bit of grain of salt here, but what do you make of this? And then I want to turn to Josh for a final question for today, but go ahead.
The sanctions really have hurt, even though many of the weapons still have smuggled in computer chips in Russia from Western sources. So they are able to break through some of those sanctions, but the financial sanctions are heavy. And they're having to inflate their currency tremendously, making the Putin administration less popular, as well as the draft, which is killing a lot of Russian soldiers, and that's making the war unpopular. And then for Putin to say he won by 86% of the vote, they control their elections in Ukraine, and they're just like this. So there are no good guys in this scenario, including our own government. But let me tell you, I was shocked when they even put Biden up for president in 2020. Because he was incapable of campaigning. They kept him in the basement. They won by massive fraud at the ballot box and in the computers. Now, I was equally as shocked when he had full dimension that they showed that they were going to continue to run him. Remember, it wasn't until that debate that the Democratic crowd on that NPR panel started to pan him, and very mildly. But I'll tell you, here's what's happened. All of the Democratic and the media knew that there was a ban on criticizing Biden or showing any clips of his dementia, a complete ban. But when the NPR crowd started to open the door that they could criticize, everyone around them said, oh, the ban must be off. And there became an avalanche of criticism of Biden as the candidate, because even the Democrats didn't want Biden in there. They wanted somebody well-spoken like the governor of Michigan or even Gavin Newsom, despite all the baggage that he has. So that was shocking, and they continued to until that debate. And that was the turning point where they were forced to. And then I was shocked that they would pick Kamala Harris. I mean, she's like a laughing hyena. It's not an infectious laugh. It's an embarrassing laugh. She can't stop laughing. And she can't make a coherent sentence on her own. If you ever hear a one-on-one interview where she's having to wing it, she's just all over the map. This is not a presidential material.
Yeah.
So she showed well in the debate because she did memorize her lines. And she also, and I covered this, probably had one of those Bluetooth earrings. It wasn't the German model that they talked about, but the Chinese are the ones that invented that. And she was taking copious notes, and that's because she was getting instructions in the ear about what to say next. There was nothing that Trump was saying that worthy of taking notes. It was just,
That's a good point. Yeah.
So this is a point. Now, I had thought probably the only reason for running Joe Biden is he's worth more for the martyr effect if they kill him once he's president or the election, and blame it on the Trump people, for example, blame it on domestic terrorism. But that has all changed now. And I think they're trying now to eliminate Donald Trump through assassination, because there is a huge vacuum in the Republican Party. There's no one to replace Trump. He's such a dominant figure in there that the opposition would collapse if you get rid of Trump. And that's why, despite the martyr effect that would occur, there's such a vacuum in the Republican Party that I think that's why they're trying to kill him. And I don't think it's over.
Joel, and just so this has been amazing, but I'd love just if you can, you kind of just did, but if you can briefly tell our audience, what can we expect in the next less than 50 days going forward? Your quick predictions on what you expect.
I think they'll steal the election from Donald Trump. From the day that Kamala got the non-elective nomination, and it was, even Gavin Newsom admitted, he was told by his handlers, you were to say this was a democratic process. Everybody knows it wasn't. But with Kamala Harris in there, I think it's going to be, first of all, the conservatives, the Republicans, going to be devastated if Trump doesn't win this election. And I don't think there's any sentiment for revolution or for revolting in the United States. Too many conservatives are mainstream and simply battling inflation and trying to keep their nose above water. There's no sentiment really for going in. And the government would love that, so they could, go to war against the armed people and take away arms. And so we'd have to resist any resistant, to do that kind of resistance. But I think the floodgates of weaponization of the DOJ, in illegal aliens coming in, gun control and other things will start with earnest. And I think we're going to be on a very downhill slope. I also want to tell you and warn you that Donald Trump is very, very bad on foreign policy. He is very subject to flattery. And when Xi Jinping came to Mar-a-Lago and flattered him and got anything he wanted from Donald Trump, Xi Jinping went back to Beijing and called Kim Jong-un and told him just flatter him when he comes. He did. And to this day, Donald Trump thinks Kim Jong-un is his bosom buddy pen pal. And he thinks that he can stop the Ukraine war with one phone call to Putin. That is not true. He doesn't understand systematic evil in the world or the fact of the phony fall and the continuing existence, although underground, of the Communist Party in Russia.
Yeah, great. Well, Joel, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out today and to walk us through a lot of this stuff. There's a lot to unpack here, and you folks, let's pull up his website again. This is worldaffairsbrief.com. and I'm sure this would be fun, dark, however you want to take it. But the things that you've shared with us today, we can all find here on your website, and I really thank you for joining us.
Well, on the right-hand side, you can see a lot of government cover-ups, in-depth examples of 9/11 and the JFK assassination, all of that type of thing. On the left-hand side, you can request a sample of the brief, which tells people how to subscribe. So a lot on the website. Yes.
Fantastic. Josh.
Yeah, folks, I read this. I read Joel's brief. It's fantastic, and it's I as well as WorldNet Daily, but we love Joel's sourcing because we know that Joel takes this seriously. If he's going to put something up there, we know that there's an account where he's thought it through, and he's only going to give the facts that can be shown to be true. And so we think of Joel as like just a great source. Joel, we want to have you back. We thought this was fantastic, and I think we always need more time with you. Everybody, please go over to worldaffairsbrief.com and subscribe there to see all of Joel's work. And Joel, you didn't mention your other books as well. Strategic Relocation. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, because of my knowledge of conspiracy and the deep state, et cetera, I have a very dark view of the future of the country. I don't think we're going to be able to eliminate the deep state, even if I were president, and I am running for president. I'm only in 3 states right now. But you got to know the kind of stuff I know in order to be able to see through the false briefings that you're going to get as president, be able to eliminate deep state actors. And that's why I dedicated the other part of my career towards preparedness. I'm one of the pioneers in the preparedness movement. My bestseller is Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Place, where to find strategically safe places when these wars come or when an EMP strike comes or the grid goes down. The cities are your major enemy because they're going to be chaos. And then I've written the Secure Home on how to secure your home, as well as the High Security Shelter book, how to do a high security safe room in a basement if you've got one.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great. All right, folks. Well, you know where to find all of that over at joelskousen.com, as well as worldaffairsbrief.com. Of course, we encourage you, to bookmark and follow us over there at worldnetdaily.com. Also on X at WorldNetDaily, over on the Rumble channel, which I know a lot of you folks are watching over there. That's fantastic. Josh, wrap us out. Where else?
Yeah,
Telegram,
folks.
I think.
So as an example, I as we were listening to Joel talk, I thought for sure YouTube will flag almost everything he has said, and that's why why we really love Rumble. We would love you to go over there to like this video, subscribe, tell your friends. We need you on Rumble to follow us, and that allows us to bring you guests, amazing guests like Joel, and of course our Telegram channel, which it leaks a lot of great stuff. But and I don't think we have an ad for it here, but our Instagram channel is really blowing up, and it has a unique format. It allows us to do stories, so encapsulate these news events in a way that you might not have time in your day to normally see. And this gives you the quick, concise version. And we'd love you to go over there. That's going to be at WorldNet Daily as well on Instagram. And Joel, we thank you so much. It was a pleasure to see you, and we can't wait to bring you back.
Let's do it again, Josh and Matt. Good to be with you.
All right.
Thank you,
Take
Joel.
care. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you on Friday. God bless.